Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the mule. The humble mule, a creature born of a union between a male donkey and a female horse, is a testament to the incredible diversity of life and the possibilities of crossbreeding. This hybrid offspring has been an invaluable asset to humanity for centuries, embodying a perfect balance of strength, speed, endurance, and sure-footedness. Mules are remarkable creatures that beautifully combine the best characteristics of their parent species. However, the mule's hybrid nature comes with a biological cost. Typically, mules are sterile, a consequence that's commonly observed in hybrid species. This sterility stems from the mismatch in the number of chromosomes of their parent species, which prevents successful reproduction. Despite this genetic setback, mules have carved a very unique niche in human societies. Their remarkable abilities have made them indispensable in various sectors, including agriculture, transportation, and even warfare. The humble mule's contribution to human civilization is a testament to its resilience and adaptability, qualities that make this hybrid creature a fascinating subject of study. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Iron Age pig. Now, brace yourself for an animal so wild, it might as well have time traveled straight from the Iron Age to your screen. We're talking about the Iron Age pig, a real porky paradox born from a cross between your friendly neighborhood domestic pig and the not so friendly wild boar. You'd think, being half domestic, these little critters would be up for a snuggle, right? Well, wrong. Despite packing some serious resilience in their porcine bodies, these hogs are about as sociable as a grizzly with a toothache. Their aggression levels are dialed up to 11, making them about as farm-friendly as a pack of velociraptors. So, what's the moral of this little piggy tale? Well, it turns out playing Mother Nature isn't as easy as it sounds. The Iron Age pig experiment ended up being less eureka and more uh-oh. A big snorting reminder that when it comes to tampering with the blueprints of life, maybe we should leave it to the pros. In short, these bristly hybrids stand as living, grunting proof that not every trip down memory lane is a stroll in the park. In our number 8 spot today, we have the hinny. Picture this: the sprinting stamina of a racehorse and the stubborn grit of a donkey, all rolled into one. Welcome to the fascinating, if a bit troublesome, life of a hinny. This peculiar beast is what you get when you mix a male horse's speed and a female donkey's tenacity. Despite the fact that they could probably outlast a marathon runner and have lifespans that would make a tortoise nod in approval, hinnies don't exactly have it easy. For starters, they usually can't have little hinnies of their own. Yeah, nature hit them with a sterile tag just like the mules. And then there's the elephant in the room. Or should we say the horse and donkey in the room. They've got a mum who's petite and a dad who's, well, horseier. The mismatch is like trying to blend a sports car with a minivan. The result is awkward. In the end, the life of a hinny is a cautionary tale straight from nature's own genetic soap opera. A clear memo that when it comes to stirring up the gene pool, sometimes you might end up with a cocktail that's a little bit more bitter than sweet.
Number 7, the disappeared. I can honestly say that I never knew about this, and I think the US involvement may be why no one wants you to know. Also, forewarning, I'm sorry if I mispronounce anything here. Feel free to correct me down below, and that goes for all the points. So, in September 1973, Chile's president, Salvador Allende, was overthrown in a coup that was assisted by the US government. General Augusto Pinochet then took over, and he was not good. Augusto was a very ruthless leader and did not let up on anyone who spoke out against him. Journalists, politicians, celebrities, pretty much anyone who spoke out seemed to suddenly disappear. Some were later found in alleyways or ditches all over Santiago, while others were never found at all. This American-backed leader essentially used the National Stadium as a secret terror base where he rounded up those who opposed him and did some pretty unspeakable things. During the 17 years that he ruled, around 40,000 people were subjected to horrible treatment, while at least 3,200 of them passed away or just straight up disappeared. Number 6, atom bomb baby. J. Robert Oppenheimer first witnessed the devastation caused by the device that he created on July 16, 1945. He was not wrong to be afraid of it. Ever since the obliteration of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, taking the lives of between 129,000 and 226,000 people, the entire world knows the absolute world-ending potential nuclear war could unleash. Oppenheimer was the leader of the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico, beginning in 1942, which was basically meant to figure out how to use atomic energy for the military. They were successful enough that it directly led to Oppenheimer wanting to completely stop development, and then, when they wouldn't, he straight up resigned. Instead, he became chairman of the General Advisory Committee of the Atomic Energy Commission, and in October 1949, he opposed the development of the devices that he helped create. This simple opposition led to him being labeled a communist supporter, suspended from secret nuclear research, and stripped of his security clearance by the Atomic Energy Commission. As soon as these devices were created and we saw their full unbridled power, not to mention the fallout that takes place afterwards, I think we can all say we would like to forget that this level of destruction is even real in the first place. Number 5. Saved. We may want to forget the destructive power of those nuclear devices, but we should acknowledge 2 times that we were saved from all-out nuclear war. The first incident was in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Soviet Vice Admiral Vasily Arkhipov, which I think I pronounced right, was on board a nuclear sub near Cuba. Unfortunately, the submarine was unable to pick up any incoming radio signals, which freaked everyone out on board, and they were unsure whether war had actually started or not. There was a vote among 3 officers on whether or not to launch a nuke. We need to thank all our lucky stars that Vasily, being the lone no vote, saved us all on that day. But there was another time. In 1983, during the Cold War, sunlight reflecting off of high altitude clouds confused the Soviet missile detection system, causing it to indicate that there were 5 incoming missiles assumed to be American. A lone Soviet Lieutenant Colonel, Stanislav Petrov, reasoned that if the US was initiating nuclear war, it would likely be an all-out attack and not just 5 missiles. He was right, and against military orders, Petrov determined it to be a false alarm and avoided a retaliatory launch by the USSR. Arkhipov and Petrov avoided all-out nuclear war. Never forget these guys. Number 4. Chinatown, LA. I bet you won't find this one in your history books, kids, but you should. In 1871, specifically on October 24th, 1871, a large mob of about 500 white men raided Chinatown in Los Angeles. This resulted in the brutal passing of at least 20 Chinese Americans, but on top of that, the mob also stole an estimated $1.5 million worth of property. Even though there is absolutely no justification for this level of animosity, the mob formed in response to a shootout that had taken place that same day that ended up taking the life of police officer Robert Thompson. That itself caused a commotion, and people began shouting the absolutely horrible statement that the Chinese were trying to take the lives of white people. You add some fear together with some ignorance and a large heaping spoonful of racism, and boom, a mob emerged. It was the very start of a decade of similar occurrences against Asian American communities in the US, which even led to the passing of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which prohibited all immigration of Chinese laborers. It's horrible, but that's America's history, ain't it? Number 3. The Salem Witch Trials. Speaking of American history and irrational fear, ever heard of the Salem Witch Trials? You probably have. Between June and September of the year 1692, around 19 men and women were found guilty of witchcraft and burned at the stake in the small, seemingly super religious community of Salem, Massachusetts. The obvious idiocracy and horror of this event shocked the world, and in an almost sick twist of things, the trials have spawned hundreds of films, books, scholarly articles, and plays. The men and women that lost their lives that day were convicted of their witchcraft crime based on the evidence of a group of young village girls who claimed to have been, quote, bewitched. The fear of this was compounded by family feuds and Native American attacks, and it developed into complete madness and hysteria that quickly spread throughout colonial Massachusetts. After that initial burning, another 150 men and women were accused in the spring of 1692 and were only allowed to survive if they confessed to the crime of witchcraft. Number 2. Chernobyl. Chernobyl is the site of the Soviet nuclear power plant that in April of 1986 had a serious accident due to flawed reactor design and staff that didn't really get the best training. The cause of the accident itself was explained really well in the HBO miniseries and at the trial that took place in real life, and I'm much too silly to explain how it happened here, but it resulted in a steam explosion and fires that released 5% of the radioactive core into the environment. Just 5%. The explosion itself ended 2 workers' lives with acute radiation poisoning affecting a confirmed 123 people and ending 28 of those people's lives. Around 5,000 cases of thyroid cancer with 15 fatal incidents were probably caused by the radioactive iodine fallout. Look, it was not good, it was scary, and what was potentially even scarier was the way people tried to cover it up. So maybe it's best that we don't forget about this one. And finally, in at number 1, it's Armenia. Now I didn't know about this one either, so it looks like we're both learning today, huh? Armenia became part part of the Ottoman Empire all the way back in the 15th century and was for the most part a Christian country. The Ottoman leaders were not very happy about this. In fact, they were furious. Mistreatment of Christian Armenians became pretty regular, and they were usually taxed more heavily and were given even fewer rights. Naturally, as you may expect, Armenians began to protest, but that wasn't going to be allowed to happen for long. Turkish military officials began slaying hundreds of thousands of Armenian people beginning in 1896. In 1914, after the Turks entered World War I on the side of the Germans, that's when the real death toll began to rise. Military leaders somehow determined that the Armenians were traitors, and so on April 24th, 1915, they took the lives of hundreds of Armenian leaders, which only led to more attacks against the Armenian people, and that all continued until 1922. The numbers don't really seem real, but more than 1 million Armenians lost their lives between 1915 and 1922. Look, I'm glad we are all now pretty aware of the horror that humans are capable of.
And we're starting off the list with Unit 731 and its human experimentation. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Operating in Japanese-occupied China, particularly in the Pingfang district of Harbin, Unit 731 conducted inhumane experiments on thousands of Chinese, Korean, and other prisoners of war, as well as civilians, including women and young ones. The unit was responsible for numerous atrocities. They conducted experiments to study the effects of biological weapons such as anthrax, plague, and cholera on human subjects. Prisoners were infected with these deadly diseases to observe their progression and develop methods of contagion. Often subjected to dissection without anesthesia, they were also exposed to freezing temperatures to observe the effects of frostbite. Some experiments involved forcing victims to stand barefoot in the snow until their limbs froze, allowing researchers to study the gangrene that followed. Researchers also tested various weapons, like bombs and flamethrowers, on live human subjects to observe their effectiveness and impact on the human body. Some prisoners were tied to stakes and used as targets for grenades and other explosives to study the effects of shrapnel wounds. This is just the tip of the iceberg, too. The things carried out here were absolutely nightmarish. And at number 9, we have human zoos. These were actually just what they sound like. You'd think human zoos are something out of like a science fiction movie or something, humans being held in captivity and observed in their quote-unquote natural habitat by aliens, but this really was a thing right here on Earth. There was a human zoo right in Coney Island. Human zoos existed shockingly up until the 1930s, possibly even further than that. Really not that long ago. Human zoos were public exhibits of people, typically from non-Western cultures, displayed in a zoo-like environment during the 19th and early 20th centuries. These exhibits were part of colonial exhibitions and world's fairs in Europe and North America. These zoos were made to emphasize the belief in the cultural and racial superiority of Europeans over non-European people at the time. People from various indigenous cultures and ethnic groups, Africans, Native Americans, Asians, Pacific Islanders, they were often brought to these exhibitions. They were made to live in mock natural habitats, perform dances and ceremonies, and regular daily activities, all within the confines of a designated exhibit area. Exhibits were often accompanied by posters and pamphlets and educational displays, reinforcing these very stereotypical and misconceptions about the exhibited cultures. Pretty wild stuff. Next on the list we have the Radium Girls. The term Radium Girl refers to female factory workers who were employed by the United States Radium Corporation in New Jersey and the Radium Dial Company in Illinois. In 1917 to about 1926, these workers were responsible for painting watch dials with a luminous paint containing radium. What they weren't told at the time is that radium is incredibly toxic. These workers were tasked with using small brushes to paint radium-based paint onto watch and clock dials to create precise markings, they were often told to shape the brush using their lips and tongues so that they'd have a more kind of sharp tip. So they were just ingesting radium on a regular basis. Over time, many of the radium girls began to experience some serious health problems: anemia, bone fractures, necrosis of the jaw. They also developed various cancers. As these health issues started coming to light, some of the women sought legal action against the companies. In the 1920s, several workers filed lawsuits against the USRC and Radium Dial Company for negligence and demanding compensation for their suffering. In the end, this case played a big role in the types of safety standards we have in workplaces today.
In our number 7 spot today, we have the Savannah cat, a product of love or science. Between a domestic cat and a serval, this feline is a strange cocktail of domestic cuddles and wild prowling. These guys don't do things by halves. They are the true embodiment of go big or go home. And by big, I mean double the size of your regular tabby, akin to swapping your cuddly kitten for a mini panther. And these bigger bodies house some pretty wild tendencies, a bit like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but in feline form. However, this mix of house pet and wild cat isn't just a spectacle, it's a little bit of a ticking time bomb. Let's face it, nobody wants their morning coffee interrupted by their pet tiger, I mean cat, chasing local wildlife or causing a ruckus. It's this fine line between awe-inspiring and eyebrow-raising that makes the Savannah cat ethical puzzle in the world of crossbreeding. In our number 6 spot today, we have the mule bird. The mule bird is a one-of-a-kind melody maker born from the union of a canary and a goldfinch, a musical marvel, you might say. But hold on to your feathers, because this birdie's tale is as unsettling as it is intriguing. You see, the mule bird is not just another chirper in the aviary, it's an aria virtuoso, belting out tunes that would make even Pavarotti's heart flutter. But, as they say, every rose has its thorns, and our songbird friend here comes with its own bittersweet symphony. For all their musical prowess, mule birds are the tragic heroes of the bird world. Despite their captivating chorus, they've been dealt a cruel hand by nature, or should we say, by us. They're sterile, forever singing solos without the chance to create a choir of their own. And this is where we, the audience, have to take a bow. We bred these birds for our amusement, crafting a creature that could never craft a lineage of its own. A poignant reminder of the Pandora's box that is crossbreeding, where human curiosity can sometimes strike a discordant note. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Lepon, whatever you prefer. It's a magnificent creature that'll leave you both fascinated and slightly disconcerted. A head like a regal lion, complete with a majestic mane paired with a sleek and agile leopard body. It's a blend of two of nature's most iconic feline species, resulting in a mesmerizing and puzzling spectacle. The lepon's rarity is truly a sight to behold. You won't find these hybrids roaming the wild. They are a product of human intervention, born in captivity, where biology took a turn down a very peculiar path. It's a reminder of the lengths we humans sometimes go to bend nature to our will. Apparently we couldn't resist the temptation to create such a majestic mashup, but let's not forget the questions this creature raises. Does the lepon represent a triumph in human ingenuity or a meddling with Mother Nature's design? Should we be playing Dr. Frankenstein with the building blocks of life? These are philosophical ponderings that tickle the brain as we admire these hybrids. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Narluga, mostly on this list just because I wanted to say the word Narluga. Prepare to have your senses confounded as we delve into the depths of this peculiar crossbreed, born from the unlikely fusion of a narwhal and a beluga whale. Through the marvels of scientific scrutiny, DNA analysis of these very peculiar looking whale skulls has confirmed the existence of the Narluga. But let me tell you, this hybrid is not your ordinary seaside mashup. It's a creature that walks the line between awe and unease. Imagine a majestic narwhal, its sleek body elegantly adorned with a spiraling tusk, entwined with the playful charm of a beluga whale. It's a fantastical creation that seems to defy nature's conventional boundaries, leaving us both mesmerized and slightly unnerved. As we gaze upon this remarkable example of crossbreeding in wild cetaceans, we can't help but wonder, what other surprises does nature hold? Are there more uncanny blends lurking beneath the surface? In our number 3 spot today, we have a growler bear. This enigmatic creature, born from the extraordinary union of polar bears and grizzly bears, is a captivating blend of nature's mightiest beasts. As climate change wreaks havoc on our planet, the boundaries of bear territories are being reshaped. Polar bears, driven by warming temperatures, venture further south, while grizzlies, seeking cooler climates, migrate north. And lo and behold, in the midst of this changing landscape, the territories of these noble creatures begin to overlap, leading to the emergence of rare hybrids, the growler bears. With their unique combination of traits, the growler bears possess the adaptability of both the open tundra and the dense forests. They're like nature's bold experiment in climate change adaptation, straddling the line between two contrasting habitats. It's a very fascinating glimpse into the way that these magnificent creatures navigate the shifting world that they inhabit, but let's not forget the disconcerting undertone. The very existence of the growler bear highlights the plight of these majestic species, forced to intermingle due to the encroaching impacts of climate change. In our number 2 spot today, we have the cama. Through the power of artificial insemination, the cama came into existence, a blend of the camel's imposing size and strength with the llama's more manageable temperament. It's a very bizarre concoction that raises both eyebrows and curiosity. Just imagine a creature roaming the earth with the body of a camel and the endearing charm of a llama. A sight to behold indeed, yet in the grand tapestry of hybrid creations, the cama remains a very uncommon marvel. Only a few of these extraordinary beings grace our world, making them a very elusive sight, even among the vast array of crossbreeds. Their rarity adds an air of mystique to their existence, leaving us with a sense of wonder and yet a hint of unease. While the intention behind the cama's creation was to combine desirable traits, we can't help but question the boundaries we push in the name of scientific exploration. What does it mean to meddle with nature's design, reshaping creatures for our own purposes? The cama serves as a reminder that with great power comes great responsibility. In our number 1 spot today, we have the jag lion, a magnificent blend of a male jaguar and a female lion, boasting a combination of very powerful physical traits and stunning markings. But as we marvel at this majestic creature, let us not forget the deeper ethical complexities that lurk beneath its mesmerizing surface. The jag lion is a rare gem, a product of human intervention in the delicate world of crossbreeding large cat species. Its existence serves as a stark reminder of the ethical quandaries that arise when we meddle with the natural order of things. While the jag lion captivates us with its undeniable beauty, it also forces us to question the impact of our actions on the creatures that roam this earth. Sure, the jag lion is truly a sight to behold, with its fierce jaguar traits melded seamlessly with the regal presence of the lion, but we must pause and reflect upon the intricate web of consequences that follow such hybrid creations. Is it right for us to manipulate nature's course, blurring the lines between species and tampering with the delicate balance of ecosystems?
Starting us off at number 10 is Henry Rathbone's Madness. Now if you don't know who Henry Rathbone is, that's fine because neither did I. Rathbone was a military officer and diplomat, and he was one half of the couple that shared the box seats with Abraham Lincoln and his wife Mary the night he was assassinated. As soon as Lincoln was shot, Rathbone tried to prevent John Wilkes Booth from escaping, but his left arm got deeply slashed from elbow to shoulder. No one thought the injury was that bad, with Lincoln having been shot in the head right next to him, but he ended up passing out from blood loss, and doctors realized the slash was right to the bone on his arm, and Booth managed to sever his artery as well. Now he physically survived, but that was the start of his mental downfall. In the years after the assassination, he just couldn't get over the fact he wasn't able to prevent the assassination. He started being paranoid that his wife Clara was cheating on him, he hated how she gave more attention to the kids than him, and even threatened her on many occasions. The family moved to Germany, but Rathbone later attacked his children in a fit of madness, where Clara tried to protect them, but he shot and stabbed her, killing her instantly. He then went on to stab himself 5 times in the chest in an attempt to commit suicide, but also failed. He was charged with all the murders, but was declared criminally insane after blaming the attack on an intruder. He was committed to a mental asylum and spent the rest of his life there. I did not know the Abraham Lincoln assassination was that juicy until now. Coming in at number 9 is the online Hannibal. I thought I knew about all the quote-unquote Hannibals in the world, but clearly I don't. Armin Meiwes was just your typical computer technician. I mean, if your typical computer technician enjoys cannibalism, then yeah, just your average Joe. Armin used to go on various websites advocating cannibalism and was a fan of the Cannibal Cafe, where people would post about their interest in cannibalism and wanting to do it. He then began putting up adverts on the cafe looking for someone to volunteer themselves to get eaten. I mean, at least he was asking for volunteers, not just going out and killing people. His ads said looking for a well-built 18 to 30-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed, which I mean is as polite as it can get if you look at the context. He eventually found a willing volunteer called Bernd Brandes who went to Armin's house on March 9th, 2001. Brandes gave him permission to amputate his penis so that they could eat it together, so Armin fed him 20 sleeping pills and set up a bath for him after the amputation. The two tried to eat the penis, but it was just too chewy. When Brandes finally got out of the bath, he fainted due to immense blood loss, and now Armin was screwed. He was like, should I kill him? Should I not? He never agreed to being killed, but he did end up killing Brandes by stabbing him in the throat and then hanging his body on a meat hook. Keep in mind the two recorded the entire night, but I thoroughly hope the tape was destroyed. It definitely wasn't, but I hope. Armin continued to eat Brandes' body for 10 months post-murder. I mean, is human flesh even good for that long? Don't we have a best before date? I swear we do. Police eventually searched his home after he tried to solicit more victims online, and they found the videotape as well as the body parts that hadn't been eaten yet, and in a shocking plot twist turn of events, he apologized and then became a vegetarian. Guys, if this cannibal can become vegetarian, surely you can become vegan. At number 8 we have the 20,000 orphans, and this one happened right here in Canada, which I'm not proud of. Now back in the 50s, the Premier of Quebec was Maurice Duplessis, and he was a very devout Catholic. Now one day he decided the Catholic Church should be the only caretaker of the alcoholics, the poor, the unwed mothers, and all the orphans in the population. Trusting the church completely, he signed over the responsibility of all hospitals, orphanages, and schools to the church. But sadly, this was not a foolproof plan. Most of the orphans weren't even orphans, they were just born out of wedlock, but the church didn't approve of that, so they took the children away. So orphanages slowly started overflowing, and the government didn't have enough money to subsidize them. They were getting more money for psychiatric patients than they were the orphans, so the church decided to do something. According to the Lunatic Asylum Act, you could commit anyone to an insane asylum to A. maintain social order, B. help them, or C. care for them. So citing the maintenance of social order, they put 20,000 orphans into mental asylums. All of them were mentally able and fit, but they were admitted anyway. In the institutions, they were subjected to horrible treatment, getting mentally, physically, and sexually abused just for $1 more than what they'd get as orphans. By the end of the 60s, the asylum era was over, but 79% of those orphans said they couldn't maintain a normal, healthy adult existence, and despite all that, Maurice and the Catholic Church never apologized for ruining those children's lives. That's a long apology overdue, my friends.
Number 7. The Great Stink. Yes, this is a real thing. The Great Stink was an event in central London during July and August of 1858 in which the hot weather exacerbated the smell of untreated human waste and industrial effluent that was present on the banks of the River Thames. The problem had been mounting for some years with aging and inadequate sewer systems that emptied directly into the Thames. The ensuing melee, which was further aggravated by pointless rumors, made people believe that the bad odor was capable of causing communicable diseases such as cholera. The smell, combined with possible side effects, prompted authorities to seek help of a civil engineer, Joseph Bazalgette. His proposal ensured that the sewage was no longer dumped on the shores of the Thames. Joseph's work ensured that sewage was no longer dumped onto the shores of the Thames and brought an end to the cholera outbreaks. His actions are thought to have saved more lives than the efforts of any other Victorian official. And his sewer system operates into the 21st century, servicing a city that has grown to the population of over 8 million.
Number 6. World War I Christmas Truce. During Christmas of 1914, a truce was held between Germany and the UK. They decorated their shelters, exchanged gifts across no man's land, and played a game of football between the soldiers. The event, dubbed as the Christmas Truce, was considered to be a series of unofficial ceasefires during World War I in 1914. The event was celebrated as a peace offering on the Western Front. The idea for the temporary hiatus was put forth by Pope Benedict XV on December 7, 1914. Both Germany and the United Kingdom refused to declare an official ceasefire. However, soldiers from both sides declared a temporary ceasefire on their own. They gathered together and celebrated the season of joy by singing carols. They also exchanged gifts that included cigarettes and plum puddings, and a good gesture, soldiers from both sides played a friendly game of soccer. Now this is so sweet and cute to me, like, aww. Number 5. A baboon was employed. Jack, a Chekma baboon, worked as a railway signal changer in South Africa for 9 years. Yup, you heard that right. He was initially employed as a pet assistant to a disabled railway signalman named James Wide. James, who was a double-leg amputee, purchased Jack and trained him to push his wheelchair and operate rail signals under his supervision. The idea of a baboon manning the signals caused an investigation to be initiated, and the authorities, though skeptical, after witnessing his job competency, officially employed Jack. The celebrity employee was paid 20 cents a day and half a bottle of beer every week. Throughout the 9 years of his employment, Jack never committed a single mistake. Now, I don't know if this is amazing or exploiting an animal, but it's absolutely insane. Number 4. The Dancing Plague. The Dancing Plague was a case of dancing mania that occurred in modern-day France in the Holy Roman Empire from July 1518 to September 1518. Somewhere between 50 and 400 people took dancing for weeks. The outbreak began in July 1518 when a woman by the name Rutafaya began dancing fervently in the street in Strasbourg. She kept up this constant dancing for a week straight. Soon, 36 others joined in on the dancing chaos. In August of that same year, the Dancing Plague had claimed 400 victims. Dancers were beginning to collapse, and it is said some even died due to stroke or heart attacks. No one knew what was causing this reaction, which meant no one understood how to remedy the situation either. Now, by early September, the outbreak began to subside as the dancers were sent to a mountain shrine to pray for absolution. Now, there are many theories behind the phenomenon, the most popular being stress-induced mass hysteria, suggested by John Waller. Other theories include ergo and religious explanations. Number 3. The doctor with a 300% mortality rate. Robert Liston, a surgeon in the 1800s, performed an operation with a 300% mortality rate. Instead of saving the patient, he ended the lives of 3 people. He was renowned for being one of the fastest surgeons alive, which at that time was a very good thing. Anesthesia as we know it didn't exist, so patients were awake for the entire procedure, meaning the shorter it was, the better. Robert was performing a leg amputation, but worked so fast that he accidentally cut off fingers on his assistant's hand. Both the patient and the assistant died later of gangrene, most likely due to the saw being unclean. And what about the third death? Well, doctors and other spectators would often watch these surgeries from the gallery, which was much more up close and personal than medical galleries today. During the procedure, Robert accidentally swiped an elderly doctor with a blade, slicing the fabric of the doctor's suit coat. Thinking he had been cut open, the doctor went into shock and died of a subsequent heart attack. Thus, 3 people died during an operation that was meant to save 1 life. Number 2. Clogged toilet sinks submarine. During World War II, the German submarine U-1206 joined the war in early April 1945. Commander Karl Adolf Schlitt proudly captained the crew into battle. However, they forgot one crucial weapon in their war with the Allied forces, a plunger. At the time, the British submarines would store the excrement on the boat and dump it once they returned to land. German submarines were far more advanced and had a complicated toilet system that would shoot waste into the sea. But after being at sea for a few weeks, the submarine's toilet system malfunctioned, leading to a smelly problem. The situation soon became dire as seawater and sewage poured into the sub and began mixing with the ship's battery. With no choices left, Schlitt ordered the submarine to resurface immediately. Unfortunately, they resurfaced near Scotland and caught the attention of the nearby British Royal Navy. Within moments, they were attacked and died. Now, this is actually kind of funny because what do you mean that happened with the toilet? And coming in at number 1 is the disappearance of Prime Minister Harold Holt. On December 17, 1967, Harold Holt, the Prime Minister of Australia, disappeared while swimming in the sea near Porsta, Victoria. Harold knew the area well and had swum there many times before. He did not hesitate in entering the water despite a large swell and visible currents. He swam with one other person as the others he was with considered it unsafe, and he swam into deeper waters and was dragged out into sea. The others called out to him, but he did not raise his arms or cry for help. He soon slipped under the waves and out of sight. The Victoria Police were contacted and initiated what became one of the largest search operations in Australian history. The entire Australian Defence Force was put on high alert. An enormous search operation was mounted and around the beach with helicopters, watercraft, police divers, 2 naval diving teams, and more than 340 people were involved in the search. Strangely, his body was never recovered. He was presumed to have died, and his memorial service was 5 days later, attended by many world leaders. Now, it's generally agreed that the disappearance was a simple case of an accidental drowning, but a number of conspiracy theories surfaced. In 1968, a story in the Sunday Observer claimed that Harold had been assassinated by the US Central Intelligence Agency, supposedly because he intended to pull Australia out of Vietnam. Also, suggestions were made that Harold had his life ended by the North Vietnamese after being incapacitated by a nerve agent, of course, or that he had faked his own death to be with a lover. In 1983, British journalist Anthony Gray published The Prime Minister Was a Spy, in which he claimed that Harold was a long-life spy for the People's Republic of China. According to Anthony, Harold faked his own death to defect to China and was collected by frogmen who dragged him to a waiting submarine. So what happened, I guess we'll never know, but it seems he just went poof.
And we're kicking off the list with human-monkey hybrids. Spanish biochemist and developmental biologist Juan Carlos Ispidas Belmonte has been working with scientists in China to develop a new type of monkey, one whose organs are made entirely of human cells. Now, they aren't just doing this for the hell of it. The purpose is to create chimeras that can be used for organ transplants. The process involves injecting monkey embryos with human embryonic stem cells in the hopes that they'll grow together. Then you'll have these monkey creatures with human livers or kidneys, and if someone happens to need one, we can grab it from a creepy hybrid monkey. There are ethical questions involved with this though. Is it wrong to create life that's only being used to harvest organs, or is the unethical side of monkey farming outweighed by the help that it can provide? If you are liking this channel so far and you haven't subscribed yet, why not hit that subscribe button? Lots of cool videos coming your way, so don't miss out. And as always, let me know your thoughts in those comments below. At number 9, we have what I'm just gonna call mice humans, because that sounds very intriguing. What is a mouse human, you're probably asking? Well, back in 2014, scientists at the University of Rochester Medical Center pulled off something pretty wild. They managed to stick a bunch of human brain cells into lab mice. This experiment didn't just teach us more about how our brains work, it also stirred up some serious moral questions about how far we should push the boundaries of science, especially when it comes to animals. They injected these mice with human glial cells, and over time these human cells meshed with the mouse's brain, basically taking over from the mouse's original cells, and this actually resulted in the mice having an increased memory capacity. They tested this by playing a sound and then zapping the mice lightly, and the next time they played the sound, they noticed that the mice were on high alert, just remembering that shock 4 times better than their regular non-human brain mouse pals. But of course, nothing's ever simple, right? Alongside this pretty incredible discovery came some heavy ethical questions. Is it cool to tinker with animals' brains like this and, you know, electrocute them? Next up, we have two-headed dogs. Now, this isn't quite a crossbreeding case per se, but it is a super messed up scientific experiment that actually did happen. So alright, let's get into two-headed dog transplants, courtesy of Vladimir Demikov, a Soviet scientist who rocked the world of surgery back in the 50s. Demikov was the mastermind behind some truly bizarre experiments where he surgically attached the head of one dog onto another, a two-headed dog. Now, the idea behind these experiments was to explore the possibilities of organ transplantation and study the body's responses to these procedures. Demikov's work was groundbreaking in the world of surgery, really pushing the boundaries of what was medically possible at the time. But as you can imagine, this stirred up a massive ethical storm. The morality of creating these Frankenstein-like creatures just for scientific curiosity, it's just inherently cruel playing around with life in such such a drastic manner. The dogs would not live long after these experiments. It's also just weird and creepy. I don't like the idea of a two-headed mangled dog thingy. I don't know. At least make it 3, then you'd have like an actual mythical creature on your hands, straight out of ancient Greek mythology. Number 7, the Kalavrita massacre. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Most of you have probably heard of the massacre in Aradur-sur-Glane, France, by SS soldiers. Well, stuff just like that was happening all the time in World War II, and this incident was very similar but much less known, at least outside of Greece. This massacre occurred during World War II in December of 1943. It was a brutal event carried out by German forces in retaliation for the Greek resistance activities against the Axis occupation in Greece. During the German occupation of Greece, the Greek resistance movement actively fought against these German forces. In response to the resistance activities, the SS targeted civilians, especially in small towns and villages, as a means of punishment, and they just wanted to send out a message. On December 13th, 1943, German troops, part of the 117th Jaeger Division, surrounded the town of Kalivirta in the Peloponnese region of Greece. The soldiers systematically destroyed the town and its surrounding villages. Men, women, and children were gathered in the town square. The Germans separated the men from the women. The men were while the women and young ones were locked inside a school building, which was then set on fire. Those who attempted to escape the burning building were by the German forces. Some women and children managed to escape though. One German soldier couldn't stand it anymore and opened a door, allowing some prisoners to flee. This soldier was later punished by death. After the war, some of the responsible German officers were tried for war crimes, but most of them escaped justice, and some were never even identified. Next on the list, we have the Vipeholm experiments. These unethical experiments were conducted on mentally disabled patients in Sweden between 1945 and 1955. The experiments aimed to study the effects of sugar on dental health. This was initiated by the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare to investigate sugar consumption and its effects on teeth. The study took place at Vipeholm Mental Institution in Lund, Sweden, and test subjects were the institutionalized residents of Vipeholm, many of whom had mental disabilities. They were vulnerable, they couldn't provide informed consent. The subjects would be divided into 2 groups, with one group being given unrestricted access to sugary foods and candies, while the other were given controlled amounts. The aim was to observe the progression of dental cavities in these groups. Excessive amounts of sugary foods were given to some of the patients, far beyond what would be considered normal or healthy. Surprisingly, this led to severe dental problems. The researchers were deliberately inflicting harm on vulnerable people, and what makes this whole thing even sadder is that the results of the experiment weren't even released until years later because of how bad it looked on the confectionery industry, who were actually helping financing this. So this led to some to believe that the researchers were bought off just to keep quiet. It wasn't until the 90s where the cruel nature of these experiments finally came to light, being condemned by the public. Number 5, Attack of the Dead Men. The Attack of the Dead Men refers to a military engagement that occurred during World War I on August 6, 1915. There was a Russian stronghold located near the town of Oswiec in the Eastern Front. It was a key defensive position for the Russians against German advances. The German army, as part of the wider Central Powers offensive on the Eastern Front, attacked the fortress, aiming to break through the Russian defenses. During the battle, the Germans employed chlorine gas, a chemical weapon to weaken the Russian defenses. The gas was intended to incapacitate or unalive the soldiers defending the fortress. Now, despite being affected by this gas, some Russian soldiers, driven by pure desperation and with cloths or handkerchiefs soaked in water covering their faces, counterattacked the advancing German forces. The gas masks available at the time were not effective against chlorine gas, and the sight of Russian soldiers appearing with their faces covered in white cloths and just blood-stained from the effects of the gas gave rise to this legend of the dead men. They basically looked like zombies rising up and moving towards the enemy. And the fierceness of the counterattack, combined with the horrifying appearance of these Russian soldiers, caused complete terror among the German troops. They fled, and they're still being attacked from behind. Many of them died, getting trapped in their own traps and stuff. Germans believed they were facing the spirits of the dead, panicked and abandoned their on the fortress. Really cool story. Number 4, an often overlooked dark historical event is the forced sterilization programs that took place in the United States. Hard to believe this actually took place, but it did, beginning in the early 1900s up until the 70s, if you can believe that. Several states implemented eugenics programs aiming to control the population and improve the genetic quality of society. One of the methods used was forced sterilization, targeting individuals considered unfit for reproduction. The victims of these programs were often people deemed socially undesirable, people with mental illnesses, disabilities, and individuals from marginalized communities, African and Native Americans primarily. It's estimated that tens of thousands of people were forcibly sterilized under these state-sanctioned programs. The exact number difficult to determine because of poor record keeping and the fact that these procedures were kinda swept under the rug. Number 3, the Great Molasses Flood. On January 15th, 1919, a massive storage tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses collapsed in the North End neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts. The Great Molasses Flood, also known as the Boston Molasses Disaster, resulted in widespread destruction and loss of life. The tank had been poorly constructed with weak rivets and insufficient safety measures. At around 12:30 p.m., the tank suddenly burst, releasing a wave of molasses, estimated to be about 25 feet high, moving at a speed of 35 miles per hour. The molasses wave engulfed the neighborhood, causing significant damage to buildings and streets and the Boston Elevated Railway. The disaster resulted in 21 people losing their lives and around 150 others being injured. The tank had been filled to capacity just 2 days before, and the increased pressure probably contributed to this collapse. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops. So the USS Cyclops was a United States Navy cargo ship that mysteriously disappeared during World War I. The ship was used primarily for transporting coal and was one of the Navy's largest fuel ships at the time. In March of 1918, during World War I, the USS Cyclops departed from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and made stops in Barbados and the Virgin Islands. Its final destination was Baltimore. The ship never reached its destination, though. It vanished without a trace along its route, disappearing in the infamous Bermuda Triangle. No wreckage or survivors were ever found. Various theories have been proposed as to why the ship vanished. Could have been from a storm, structural failure, or an enemy attack, but none have been proven. The disappearance of this ship resulted in the loss of 309 crew members and passengers, making it one of the largest non-combat losses of life in U.S. naval history. And finally, we're going to finish things off with a bizarre one, with the trial of a corpse. This happened in January of 897 AD, several months after the death of Pope Formosus. After Formosus died, his body was exhumed and he was put on trial. Not before he died, after. The trial was orchestrated by Pope Stephen VI or 7th. There's some debate on that, but he really just wasn't a fan of Formosus. Stephen accused Formosus of perjury, violating church laws, and of being an illegitimate pope. During the trial, Formosus's 7-month-old rotting corpse was dressed up and placed on a throne. A deacon was appointed to act as his advocate, answering questions on behalf of the dead pope. Formosus was found guilty on all charges. His papacy was declared invalid, and his acts as pope were declared invalid. 3 fingers on his right hand, which he had used for blessings, were then severed, and his remains were thrown into a river. After Pope Stephen VI's death, Pope Theodore II annulled the whole trial and restored Formosus's honors and good name. He called the trial a travesty, declaring the verdict null and void.
Number 10. Violet Jessup survived 3 sinking ships. Violet Jessup had some horrible luck, or great luck, however you want to look at it. In 1911, she began working as a stewardess on the White Star Line RMS Olympic. Violet was on board September 20th, 1911 when Olympic left from Southampton and collided with the British warship HMS Hawke. Despite damage, the ship was able to make it back to port without sinking. She continued to work on Olympic until April 1912 when she was transferred to its sister ship, the Titanic. Violet boarded the RMS Titanic as a stewardess on April 10th, 1912. 4 days later, on April 14th, it struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank about 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision. She was later ordered into Lifeboat 16, and as the boat was being lowered, one of Titanic's officers gave her a baby to look after. The next morning, Violet and the rest of the survivors were rescued by the RMS Carpathia and taken to New York City on April 18th. Then, in the First World War, Violet was a stewardess for the British Red Cross. On the morning of November 21st, 1916, she was aboard the HMHS Britannic, the younger sister ship of Olympic and Titanic that had been converted into a hospital ship when it sank in the Aegean Sea after an unexplained explosion. Britannic sank within 55 minutes, ending the lives of 30 of the 1,066 people on board. Now, it's just incredible that she survived all 3 incidents without getting injured, and I can't believe that after that first sinking, she would go on a boat again, because I know I wouldn't. Number 9. Carbon dioxide went down due to so many deaths. Genghis Khan was the founder and first Khagan of the Mongol Empire, which later became the largest adjoining land empire in history. Having spent the majority of his life uniting the Mongol tribes, he launched a series of military campaigns which conquered large parts of China and Central Asia. In the 13th century, he ended the lives of so many peasants that the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were significantly reduced as a result. During his 21-year reign, his destructive armies were responsible for the deaths of up to 40 million people. With so many people gone and nobody left to farm the lands owned by the peasants, nature went back to its true form and grew back into carbon-absorbing forests. It's estimated that 700 million tons of carbon were wiped from the atmosphere, which, to put in perspective, is around the same amount of carbon dioxide generated in a year through global gasoline consumption. That is just crazy. Number 8. The unlucky town of St. Pierre. In the late 1890s and early 1900s, St. Pierre, Martinique was known as a beautiful town, but there was a darkness looming over it, a volcano. Citizens of the area were so used to the volcanic activity that no one took it seriously when the fresh steaming vent holes and earth tremors started during April 1902. The minor explosions began at the summit of the volcano, ash began to rain down continuously, and the nauseating stench of sulfur filled the air, but for some reason they stayed in the town. Even worse, more than 100 snakes slithered down and invaded the town. Yeah, snakes. And they ended the lives of 50 people, and people still stayed living there. Then on May 5th, a landslide of boiling mud and water from the Etang Set crater spilled into the River Blanche and 23 workmen died. This was followed by a tsunami that ended the lives of hundreds of people. Now this naturally caused concern in the town and many people wanted to leave. So yeah, people just stayed there and went on with their lives while all of this was happening. Even after the whole snake situation, it couldn't be me. Now 3 days later, on May 8th, Mount Pelee finally exploded, sending an avalanche of white-hot lava straight towards the town. Within 3 minutes, St. Pierre was completely obliterated of its 30,000 population, and there were only 2 people who survived.
And at number 7, we have the Zonky, Zorse, Zedonk. They all sound like something out of Dr. Seuss, but they're a very real thing. They're a female or male zebra mixed with either a female or male horse or a female or male donkey. Whatever the variation though, it's highly unethical. Breeding these things might seem kind of intriguing, but it raises ethical red flags. Just like any animal hybrid, the big issue here is that these hybrids are usually sterile, rendering them unable to reproduce naturally, which raises concerns about their overall well-being. Breeding animals for novelty or profit, knowing they can't lead to substantial populations, seems a little ethically rocky. Plus, they often have health issues related to their mixed genetic makeup. There's just no purpose in breeding these animals other than the spectacle of it. Next up, we have whalfins. Made a false killer whale, which is a more aggressive species of dolphin, with a common bottlenose dolphin, and you get a whalfin. These hybrids have been known to occur in captivity in marine parks or aquariums, and that's a big part of the bad ethics behind this one. The marine parks are notoriously crappy to animals, but aside from how these animals are often treated in these places, whalfins, like many hybrid animals, often face health issues and higher mortality rate compared to their parent species. The mixing of genetic material from different species can lead to various psychological and behavioral problems, causing suffering and reducing their overall quality of life. Dolphins can't occur naturally in the wild because of the geographical and just behavioral differences between false killer whales and bottlenose dolphins. Breeding them in captivity is not part of the natural order. It's human tinkering. Plus, combining a highly intelligent dolphin with an apex predator dolphin, maybe not the best idea. Next on the list are monkeys infused with human brain cells. Chinese scientists have recently achieved a pretty big milestone in the realm of neurobiology, basically infusing human brain cells into monkeys, a process that created chimeric embryos, organisms consisting of cells from both humans and monkeys. The objective here was to gain a better understanding of brain development and disorders like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases. Scientists wanted to understand how human brain cells, once integrated into the monkey brains, behaved and interacted with the host environment. It's a fascinating experiment, but there are of course moral implications of blending human and animal cells and possible consequences too. I've said this before, but I just do not want a Planet of the Apes situation. I don't want a rogue AI situation. Virtually any science fiction situation happening in real life is a no-no. Sometimes I feel like scientists just haven't watched or read any science fiction before. And at number 4, we have another real case of a successful head transplant, this one done with a monkey. So meet Dr. Robert White. Dr. Robert White, a neurosurgeon who took inspiration from Vladimir Demikov's wild experiments and decided to push the envelope even further in the 70s. Dr. White didn't stop at two-headed dogs. He aimed for something even more audacious: monkey head transplants. So Dr. White successfully transplanted the head of one monkey onto the body of another. It's giving me some real Sid from Toy Story vibes here. But to be fair, the procedure wasn't just about curiosity. It was an attempt to understand the intricacies of spinal cord fusion and nerve connections. I was trying to explore the possibility of giving paralyzed or severely disabled people a new lease on life. But, at the same time, a monkey's head being placed onto the body of another one is just, people get a little creeped out by that. The idea of swapping heads between animals, just kind of gross. Once again, the monkeys also did not live long after the procedures. Next up, we have Sam Harris, aka the Pigman of Northfield. This is definitely the most believable of all the things on this list. The story goes that a 17-year-old boy, Sam Harris, went missing on October 30th in the hills of Northfield, Vermont in 1951. Harris had gone out to egg some houses that night, but never returned home. A search was launched, but he never turned up. But in the months that followed, sightings of Sam began being reported, only he looked different. He wore the face of a pig and would terrorize the New England locals. Farmers began finding their pigs slaughtered and horrendously maimed. Rumors began to spread about him having become this half-man, half-pig abomination, and even laying with pigs, creating an entire breed of pigmen offspring. So yeah, why wasn't this taught in school? Forget fractions. I want Pigman. 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 Alright, second place, humanzees. The concept of a chimpanzee-human hybrid has been around for years. Although there aren't any definitive documented cases of this ever having worked, there are real-life cases of attempts being made. First in the 1920s, a Soviet scientist with too many V's in his name, Ilya Ivanov, he attempted to create a chimp human. His attempt was pretty blunt. Put some human love juice into some female chimps. Luckily, this was done artificially. Surprise, surprise, but the chimps did not get pregnant. So the logical next step was, well, if chimps can't get pregnant, just take that and reverse it. Take some ape goo and try to get some human volunteers pregnant instead. And there were volunteers, surprisingly, but the experiment never actually took place, thank God. His orangutan died, and then the government exiled him. Anyway, cut to 1981, and a Chinese scientist named Ji Yongzhang claimed to have worked on a human-chimp hybrid experiment in 1967, in which a female chimp was impregnated with human you-know-what, but apparently the chimp died before actually giving birth. Finally, though, we have ligers. Ligers are not a thing from Napoleon Dynamite. I mean, they are, but they do actually exist in real life too. The hybrid offspring of a male lion and a female tiger are indeed real, but they're also met with a lot of health issues, mostly related to their size. Ligers grow much larger than their parent species, sometimes reaching lengths of 10 to 12 feet and weighing up to 900 pounds or more. Their immense size puts a lot of pressure on their bodies, including their organs and skeletal structure, but especially their hearts. Ligers often suffer from heart conditions, mainly due to their hearts struggling to support their massive bodies. And this disproportionate growth can also lead to other health issues, difficulty in breathing, arthritis, and just a shortened lifespan compared to their lion and tiger counterparts. Now, when it comes to the moral implications of creating ligers, primary concern revolves around the ethics of hybridization in captivity. Ligers don't occur naturally in the wild, and their creation is solely a result of human intervention, typically in captive breeding facilities, think, what was that show? The Tiger Guy? All those kinds of places. People who collect exotic animals. Breeding ligers and other hybrids like tigans, which are the offspring of a male tiger and a female lion, it's just prioritizing human curiosity and profit over the actual welfare of the animals. It's highly exploitive, mainly done as this novel thing for entertainment purposes.
Coming in at number 10, it's the Great Stink. Because of course it is. The sewer system in London, England, prior to this happening was not a good system, to put it mildly. Human poop would often be pumped into cesspits, tanks, and big old holes in the ground that would quickly fill up and run off into the streets through culverts that ran down said streets. Or the yummy wet waste would seep into people's basements and foundations, creating pockets of methane that would cause explosions from time to time. All the sewage that did successfully go into the system, which was meant primarily for rainwater, just pumped out into the River Thames, and even some sources of drinking water. The problem is, other than the obvious ones there, it didn't actually flow out to sea through the river. No, it actually dispersed among the river thanks to the tidal nature of said river, which meant for centuries the river was just being injected with more and more and more sewage, which seeped into the ground all around the giant open sewer river that in the summer of 1958 all bubbled up to the surface thanks to the heat and released its lovely malodorous stench for all those far and wide around the city of London to sniff up. Nice. Thankfully, Joseph Bazalgette was the civil engineer placed in charge of designing the new system, and boy, did he do a good job. He basically saved the entire city. Joseph's sewers ran parallel of the River Thames and carried all the way east, where it would eventually flow out in the river again, but in a place where it actually did flow out into the sea. He also developed water treatment plants along the new sewer system to clean the nastiness, and he created embankments along the river that would help stop the waste continuing to build up even further. He even came up with other ways for the city to get fresh drinking water that could be used. All so that we would never have to remember this malodorous part of history ever again. Thanks, dude. You did good. Number 9. 3 for 1. Back in the day, a guy by the name of Robert Liston was renowned for being one of the fastest surgeons alive. Being fast as a surgeon then was a pretty damn good thing. And that's because the anesthesia we are accustomed to now didn't exist, so patients were awake for the entire surgery. So yeah, a quick surgery is pretty preferable. The thing with going fast though is that it's extremely easy to make a little whoopsie sometimes. For example, one time Liston was performing a leg amputation, but it turns out that he was working so fast he didn't realize he accidentally cut off 2 fingers of his assistant's hand. That's pretty bad, but then you learn that both the patient and the assistant passed away later of gangrene. But wait, there's even more. Doctors and medical students would often watch these surgeries from the gallery, which wasn't really a gallery like we have today. They were basically right beside you. During that same procedure that I just talked about, Liston accidentally swiped near an elderly doctor with a blade, slicing the fabric of the doctor's suit coat. Problem is, he thought he had been cut open, most likely because this guy just accidentally cut off his assistant's fingers. The doctor went into shock and passed away from a heart attack. This man took out 3 people just trying to save 1. That's insane. Number 8, the Berlin Wall. Most people are probably aware of this, but for younger audiences, maybe not. Basically, for about 30 years during the Cold War era, the Berlin Wall separated Germany's communist east side from the democratic west side. The makeshift wall itself was constructed overnight on the 12th and I guess the 13th of August 1961 by the German Democratic Republic to stop Western fascists from entering East Germany and undermining the building of a socialist state. But really, the wall was mainly just there to stop people from defecting from the east side to the west side. It wasn't exactly a big agreed upon thing, so people in Berlin woke up on August 13th completely cut off from family, friends, work, and their own homes, with no way to get from east to west. Eventually, the quickly built wall was replaced by a 12-foot tall, 4-foot wide concrete barrier guarded and covered with booby traps. At least 171 people were killed just trying to get over, under, or around the Berlin Wall, which stood until the 9th of November 1989. Maybe we should stop building walls between each other and just accept each other.
Filling our number 7 slot are the Silent Twins. Now I've heard this story many times now, but I know a lot of people still haven't, and it is a scarily weird event, so I thought I would just include it. So June and Jennifer Gibbons were a pair of identical twins born in Barbados but who grew up in Wales. In school, the girls used to be the only people of colour there, which made them feel isolated, and to add to that isolation, both girls spoke so fast that understanding them was very hard. They were so severely bullied at school that the principal used to actually let them leave early every day to avoid being bullied. Their way of talking slowly got more and more unintelligible, to the point no one could understand them except each other. The twins at this point spoke to no one but each other and their little sister, and at school would refuse to read and write. In an attempt to get the girls to communicate with others, they were sent to different boarding schools in which they both became catatonic and withdrawn until reunited. By the 80s, the girls were committing crimes like arson, vandalism, and theft, and were later admitted to the mental health institution Broadmoor Hospital. They stayed there for 12 years, and the girls always had an agreement that if one of them died, the other had to speak to other people and live a normal life. During their 12-year stay, they began believing one of them absolutely had to die in order for the other to go on, so Jennifer agreed to be the sacrifice. One day when the girls were being transferred to another clinic, Jennifer could not be awakened upon arrival and then later died of acute myocarditis, which is a sudden inflammation of the heart. And that literally came out of nowhere because there were no drugs in her system, no poison. The only evidence was that the day before she kept saying she was dying, and then the next day just died in June's lap. Now at number 6 is Dr. Marcel Petiot. Marcel was a French doctor and a serial killer. I'm assuming one was his day job and the other was just a hobby. And you know what they say, don't quit your day job. Now how he killed people was during the occupation, he would promise Jewish people and other people wanted by the Germans that he could secure safe passage for them outside of France. He'd tell them they would travel to Argentina through Portugal for 25,000 francs a person. Once people would pay him the money and go to his house, Marcel would tell them that Argentine officials required all entrants to be inoculated against any and all diseases, and as a doctor, his victims would trust him to deliver the injection needed. But that injection wasn't a vaccine, it was cyanide. The injection would obviously kill them, and then he would take all their belongings and valuables and dispose of their bodies. At the start, he would just dump them in the Seine River, but that seemed to be a lot of work for him, so he changed up his tactics and for more convenience, would drown their bodies in acid or quicklime in his basement and incinerate them. He was caught when his neighbors complained to the police about a foul-ass stench coming from his house and the amount of smoke coming out of his chimney. In preparation of a fire hazard, which is what the police thought it was, police called firemen to his house who found a huge fire in his basement, and in the fire, human remains. Coming in at number 5 is the Chichijima incident. Now let's flash back to World War II for a second. In September of 1944, Japanese forces shot down 9 American planes near the Japanese island of Chichijima. All 9 of the airmen tried to escape, but 8 were recaptured and 1 escaped, that one being 20-year-old George H.W. Bush. After the capture of the others, it was found out they had been brutally tortured and beaten before being killed. Each one was beheaded, and then American authorities found out that body parts of 4 of the victims were then eaten by Japanese officers. I don't even know what to say about this one. Just imagine Bush wasn't the one who survived and he was also eaten. He would have never become president. Would his son have become president? I don't even know. I feel like America would have turned out very different, I feel. What do you guys think? At number 4 is The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, and I wish that was a title of a cute Enid Blyton book, but 'twas not, my friends. Was not. Also known as the Cleveland Torso Murderer, this person was never identified, but boy oh boy did he create hell in their 30s. He They, she, you never know. The person was suspected to have killed 12 people, but modern research points to around 20 victims. Most of the victims were classed as the working poor and lived in shanty towns, which made them easier to target. The murderer would behead every single victim and then dismember them, usually severing their torso in half or at least severing their appendages. Had to be one or the other, am I right? All the male victims were castrated and a lot of them had chemicals all over their bodies. The victims ended up being found way after they were killed, sometimes more than a year later, but identifying them was the problem since they had no heads, just torsos. I mean, last time I checked, you can't identify someone from their belly button or their nipples, so what to do? Now, the serial murders had everyone in Ohio worried, and the murderer even taunted Elliot Ness, the guy working on the case, by leaving the torsos of 2 of the victims in full view of his office. I mean, he didn't just rub salt in Elliot's wound, he just rubbed the torsos right in his wounds. I know that doesn't make sense, but Elliot would get it. Filling our number 3 slot is Smiley. I forgot this was on the list. This one made me so emotional when I was reading it. I actually had to start listening to upbeat music so I wouldn't cry. Legit, true story. Ask Che. This is just horrible in every way. Baby P, who was mostly called Smiley by family, was a very smiley little baby that was hiding months and months of abuse and pain inflicted on him by his mum and stepdad. The stepdad would literally use him as a punching bag to the point he had trained Smiley like a dog almost. He would instinctively put his head on the ground every time his stepdad came into the room. All the while his mum was just chain smoking and playing online poker. He would get suffocated in layers of clothing till he was gasping. His fingernails were ripped off by pliers. The stepdad trained their Rottweiler to bite Smiley. There was skin missing from his nose, his lips and tongue. His left ear was ripping so it was coming away from his head. He had 8 broken ribs, a fractured shin bone. His front tooth had been knocked out and later found in his stomach, and the stepdad used to even throw him in the air and let him just hit the ground. One day he did it so hard that he snapped Smiley's spine in half. When police searched their house, they found dog and human feces everywhere, the dead bodies of chicks, mice, and a dismembered rabbit. But worst of all, they found Smiley's cot and bedroom walls covered in his blood. He weighed what a baby 5 months younger than him should have weighed, and he had been headbutting the walls and floors to inflict pain on himself. The mum and stepdad were arrested for the murder later on, but I just can't wrap my head around how messed up in the head you have to be and how evil you have to be to do that to a defenseless child. Smiley had even started saying his first few words and calling his stepdad dad. How can you do that? How can you do that to a kid? I don't understand. I think what made reading the story worse was that they had a graphic image of what his wounds would have looked like, not an actual picture of him, but a graphic, and it was just not good. Now at number 2 is the Jonestown Massacre. I know, you guys have heard it all before, but regardless, I did have to put it on the list. If you know the story, feel free to skip to number 1, but if not, stay tuned for a wildly sinister story. The People's Temple Agricultural Project, better known as Jonestown, was a massive city which was actually just a cult run by Jim Jones located in Guyana. The base of the cult was originally in Indianapolis, but after receiving heavy criticism, he moved his cult from location to location until finally leasing 3,800 acres of land in Georgetown. In the summer of 1977, Jones and his hundreds of followers moved to Jonestown, and by 1978, the population of the city had peaked at under 900 people. Life in the commune was bad, but for the followers, they were reaching some sort of enlightenment. Jones's mental and physical health started declining rapidly. He had developed lung cancer and was actively abusing drugs like Valium, LSD, and barbiturates, to name a few. Reporters and Congressman Leo Ryan came to Jonestown and were all assassinated. 5 people died, and despite later reporters saying they would say Jonestown was in good standing, the damage was done. Jim claimed he had failed and that all was lost. That night, a broadcast was made for every follower to return to their house. During that time, aides made huge metal tubs with grape flavored Kool-Aid that was poisoned with cyanide, Valium, chlorohydrate, and Phenergan. Jim called everyone to the pavilion after that, and he gave the death speech to his followers that was recorded and can actually be heard online, and soon after the members started drinking the poisoned Kool-Aid one by one. First was Roletta Paul and her 1-year-old infant. They literally had to inject the poison into the kid's mouth to get the deed done. Death happened pretty quickly, 5 minutes for kids, even less for babies, and around half an hour for adults. That day, 918 people died in a mass suicide, which was the largest single loss of American civilian life until until 9/11 happened. And finally, at number 1 is the doll maker. This one actually made my skin crawl, like it's disgusting. So Anatoly Moskvin was a Russian philologist who did unspeakable things. Now it started when he was a young schoolboy. He would often visit cemeteries and would blame his obsession with the dead on the fact he saw a funeral procession for an 11-year-old girl when he was younger. Apparently, funeral goers forced him to kiss the corpse's face, who he didn't even know that well. As he grew older, he got more and more interested in death, the occult. He had a library consisting of 60,000 books about it and a huge collection of dolls. But dolls they were not. Despite being described as a genius eccentric by fellow academics, Anatoly was arrested in November of 2011 after police started investigating a slew of grave desecrations in several cemeteries. When they stormed his house, they found 26 corpses, but he'd actually desecrated a record 150 graves. God knows what he did to the rest of those bodies. He made the child corpses into actual dolls. He would mummify each one to preserve their bodies. He would then wrap their limbs in strips of cloth to make them seem more full before dressing them up in wigs and brightly colored children's clothes. All these details convinced his parents, who he was living with, that they were homemade dolls and not real people. Like, how dumb can you be? He claimed it took him 10 years to assemble all the dolls, and since his parents traveled often, they had no idea what he was up to. He was declared to have paranoid schizophrenia, which saved him jail time but put him in an asylum. When asked why he did all of this, he said he had a lot of sympathy for dead children and felt they should be brought back to life. He put their remains in dolls' clothes so they could have functional bodies when they did come back to life. He knew he was committing a crime but felt that children were just calling out to him, begging to be rescued. I think my face says it all at that point.